Welcome back to the brutal, blood-soaked world of 68, the iconic comic that reimagines the Vietnam War, but with zombies. In this week's action-packed episode, we follow a small band of survivors struggling to navigate the perilous situation they're trapped in. Surrounded by the dead and haunted by the living, a dark question looms. Will they tear each other apart long before the monsters ever get the chance to? It's difficult to say, but when it comes to 68, sometimes it's best to expect the unexpected.
Hey guys, I'm your host, Juan, and today, due to popular demand, we're continuing with the next arc of the 68 comic book series, known as 68 Scars. This story was done by the same creative team as the original, that being writer Mark Kidwell, artist Nat Jones, and colorist Fotos. So yeah, that's pretty exciting. Fair warning before we get started though, this story, this go-around, is notably more complicated. There are 4 different settings and a large cast of new characters to keep track of. But don't worry, I'll guide you along as best I can. Also, before we begin, make sure you're subscribed to the channel in order to stay in the loop with all the latest videos. Also, consider signing up for my membership program here on YouTube. Feral's tier members were able to watch this video early, and the premium tier will soon have exclusive bonus episodes for you guys. But enough with all that, let's jump right in.
Our story begins right where the previous one left off, with Private Quen Yam fighting for his life on the roof of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. And he's managing himself pretty well, all things considered. That is, until his weapon goes completely kaput. And Yam's just about ready to meet his maker, when a U.S. Army helicopter buzzes through the air to his rescue. And on the bird is a large man wearing war paint, screaming his head off as he mows down zombies with an automatic M60. The flamboyant madman yells at Yam to get aboard the chopper, and so the young lad leaps off the roof into the helicopter like an action hero. There he meets the pilot, a guy named Curly Dan Hickok, who's also wearing war paint and has a helmet with Indian feathers on it. Apparently these guys think they have like 1/64th native ancestry, and so their whole gimmick is that they think they're Indian warriors. Whatever, bruh. Anyway, the other one of them drops some heavy explosives onto the zombies, and the 3 of them fly away victorious. The guy introduces himself to Yam as John Crazy Horse Samson, and explains that every helicopter in the area got the embassy's distress call, but they were the only ones able to stop by and help out any survivors. Right now, they're flying back to the main HQ, which is a makeshift base at Tan Son Nhut International Airport, which houses all that's left of the official U.S. presence in Saigon. But Yam barely registers any of this, as he gets loopy and starts fading in and out. So the Indians step on it and hurriedly zoom toward the airport base. As that is going on, we transition onto the ground, where there's this outpost on the perimeter of the impromptu military base. And the guy in charge of this outpost, known as Bunker 051, well, he's an angry and unpredictable man named Sergeant Dawes. Basically, the sergeant and his men are responsible for making sure that no Viet Cong or zombies ever get near enough to break into the base. However, they are dangerously undermanned, and Sergeant Dawes demands into the comms for immediate air support. So, when Hickok and Samson's helicopter flies overhead without stopping, the man convulses with rage. And that's where we leave him for now, but don't worry, he'll definitely be back. As for now, the chopper lands at the U.S. military base, which, like I said, is just a damaged and battered Vietnamese airport. In any case, the Indians take Yam to the base's nurse, who is a woman named Alice. She asks Yam if he's wounded, but the soldier is delirious, and he only absent-mindedly calls Alice pretty, leading her to conclude that he's just heavily fatigued and dehydrated, but probably fine otherwise. So they all walk into the terminal, where they find the officer in charge of the entire base, engaged in a heated phone conversation with his back turned to them. The officer's name is Major Swan, and right now Sergeant Dawes is screaming at him over the phone about how perilous the situation is at the outpost, and about how the wannabe Indian warriors deliberately disregarded his calls for help. Samson tells Major Swan, who in turn tells Sergeant Dawes, that actually they were carrying, a potentially injured man to base and they couldn't stop. But the sergeant is having none of that, and he threatens to harm them all before Major Swan simply hangs up on him. The major then finally turns around, and Yam takes one look at him and passes out. And that is because, as you can see, half of Major Swan's face is heavily disfigured, leaving him with a permanent Two-Face-like appearance. From there, we are introduced to another new setting, this one on the Mekong River, which is, of course, Asia's third largest river, which runs through the entirety of Vietnam. Anyway, cruising on a dingy fiberglass John boat are two Navy men who are arguing. The guy on the left is named Chief Petty Officer Tremaine, and he spent years in Vietnam at this point, making him very experienced. The guy on the right with a pointy chin, on the other hand, is some kind of commissioned officer named Kearney. Right now, the two are arguing about operational procedure. You see, Kearney is fresh out of the Naval Academy, and he's obsessed with doing things by regulation. And that's a problem because despite being a junior officer, basically in training, because he's an officer, he automatically outranks every enlisted man, including Chief Tremaine. And this is a military dynamic especially tense during wartime, because you have these brand new, freshly minted officers who technically have authority over every combat-hardened veteran with years of direct field experience under their belt. But in any case, we are introduced to the third member of the crew here, who is a junior enlisted guy named Seaman Amberson, and he's just slayed a zombie on a makeshift jet ski. Kearney is outraged at this, and as Chief Tremaine assists Amberson on board, the uptight officer threatens to report them, because that could have been a civilian he just killed. But the chief straight up calls him a moron, and points out that that was clearly a fucking reanimated corpse. He tells Kearney that he has no idea what he's talking about, and this verbal bruising is reaffirmed later on as well, when Amberson, in good faith, candidly tells Kearney that while he acknowledges that he has formally memorized tactics in a classroom, in reality, he has no practical experience, and so he should be humble about that. But the blockhead Kearney says he doesn't care, and he stubbornly brushes that advice off. He says that he's there to make sure everything's followed directly to the letter, exactly like in all the books he studied. Whatever the case, we next learn what the three of them are even doing out there. It turns out that their mission orders are to go to a dangerous bank on the river in order to pick up a 6-man team of Navy SEALs who have been stranded in the jungle since the apocalypse began the day before. So, with that plan set in motion, we return to Tan Son Nhut Airport, where the manic Sergeant Dawes barges into Major Swan's office, slamming 3 severed zombie heads down on his desk. The sergeant dares the major to go ahead and court-martial him, and with spit flying out of his mouth, he yells about his lack of relief and air support. Major Swan tells him to calm down and get back to his post, but Sergeant Dawes is irate, and when the Major subtly gestures toward his weapon, Dawes pulls his gun out and threatens to kill the commander. But before things can escalate any further, the Indians, Samson and Hickok, enter the room, and they distract the sergeant long enough for Major Swan to deck the man across the face. The Major stands over him and orders him to return to the perimeter where he belongs. He sternly states that he'll send reinforcements when he can find them, but as for now, the sergeant is lucky that he needs people, or else he would have them locked up at once. The Major looks at Sergeant Dawes one last time, and gravely warns him that if he ever shows back up again unannounced or with weapons, he'll have him shot dead on sight. Nurse Alice and a black guy on crutches, who will be properly introduced to in a minute, they happen to see the aftermath of all this. Alice openly admires how Major Swan is able to keep it all together, despite the volatile personalities, and the fact that the undead are walking the earth. The black guy asks, what happened to the Major's face anyway? And Alice shares that this is actually his third tour in Vietnam, and those are shrapnel scars. The black guy takes this all in, and he hobbles off, astonished that a wounded man would ever deliberately choose to remain stuck in a terminal war, far away in a foreign land. And so the scene ends with Alice alone, pulling down her sleeve and staring at her own scars running down her wrist. Believe it or not, from there we move to yet another new location, this one all the way across the world, in New York City. We meet Private Yam's parents, who are still alive, holed up in their market shop in Chinatown. The mother's name is Faye, and she speaks with a heavy, stereotypical Asian accent. It's revealed later on that she's just doing it to be funny, which seems a little bit inappropriate given the circumstances at the moment, but anyway, the father's name for his part is Joe, and right now he's looking out the window, watching his zombified neighbors stagger by on the streets. The situation's not looking great at the moment. They only have a single gun, and they're just about out of bullets. And unfortunately, Joe winds up using them all rather quickly on the zombies that get too close for comfort. So he blockades the front door and leaps up the stairs. There he finds Faye, who leads him to the roof, where she has, as a joke, written out the word arrive instead of alive for any passing planes that fly overhead to see, so they can hopefully be rescued. And apparently the two hung out on the top floor of their building for a while, because we next see them a few days later, in the dead of night, when they're awoken by loud clanking sounds outside their window. Joe looks out and sees U.S. military forces methodically clearing out the streets with flamethrowers and bulldozers. And soon thereafter, a ladder is extended to the rooftop, and a firefighter reaches out a hand to them. He announces that he's there to take any survivors he finds to a refugee center on Staten Island. And this is apparently because the government is getting ready to abandon all the rest of New York City. So Faye and Joe are taken to the safety location, and it's certainly not glamorous. It was obviously hastily constructed, and the quality of life is not that great. The food sucks, there's no heat, and they have to go to the bathroom in these dugout ditches. But clearly there are bigger problems going on in the world right now, and that is quickly evidenced by an emergency broadcast that blares across the television. The newscaster, in a somber voice, announces that President Lyndon Baines Johnson was just pronounced dead in Washington. Reports indicate that he died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, and allegedly, next to his body was a suicide note, simply reading, "My dear fellow Americans, I'm truly sorry. I have failed you." There is a dramatic silence, and our time with Joe and Faye is concluded with them receiving word that some fellow refugees are planning to leave the camp and strike it out on their own, and that they're more than welcome to join them. That's it for now for them, but we'll see them later on in story arcs down the road. But as for now, we catch up with the rest of our cast and see what they've been up to during the time jump. We start with Private Yam, who is jolted awake by a tambourine jingling in his face, and the person responsible appears to be some crazed man who is giggling and standing over Yam's bed. The stranger next pulls out a medical blade, and Yam thinks he's about to get shanked, but the guy just slices his gauze bandages and then continues shaking his instrument. The black guy from before is walking by, and through the open door he sees all this, and so he yells at the loony to get the hell out of there. Yam thanks him, and the guy assures the private that the tambourine guy's harmless, but he's obviously not all there. Apparently, he was found with no identification, and he actually can't speak, so everyone on base just calls him Smith, but I'll call him Tambourine instead. Anyway, the black guy informs Yam that it's February 17th, and that he's been out for 3 days, and this causes the young lad to start freaking out, and he cries that he needs to get back to his platoon at Firebase Aries, but the guy calms him down, reminding him that the firebase was overrun and firebombed. He then reveals that he was actually there. He's another survivor of Firebase Aries. Yam looks up at him and apologizes for not knowing who he is. The guy smiles back and says that it's okay. He was just another fellow grunt. And so he shakes Yam's hand and introduces himself as Henry J. Watson. And with that, we transition over to the team on the Mekong and see how they fared over the last 3 days. In a few words, not very well. We see First Class Kearney sweating bullets and cradling the injured and non-responsive Chief Tremaine somewhere deep in the jungle. The chief is making incoherent moans, and Kearney begs him to be quiet so they don't give away their position. However, it's too late, and Kearney's eyes grow wide as he feels a cold blade pressed against his neck. And it's quickly revealed that it's actually 2 of the Navy SEALs they were looking for, days ago at this point, who are now interrogating Kearney about what happened to him over and over again. And believe it or not, even amidst this pressure, Kearney has the audacity to criticize the SEALs for being out of proper uniform. Unreal, bro. Anyway, he relays the story once again for us. As it turns out, the team was sailing to the pickup point, smooth as any other day. However, their serenity was rudely interrupted by the sudden emergence of zombies from the depths of the river, which we see that the Viet Cong intentionally released. I guess they're already using the undead as targeted weapons, which seems a little far-fetched, but okay. Whatever the case, one of the creatures gets caught in the propeller, stalling it and allowing several of the hungry beasts to climb aboard. So it's absolute pandemonium, and every man fights for his life. Kearney is attacked by a rotting zombie with a knot of snakes writhing in its chest, and he's about to get got right until Seaman Amberson comes to his rescue, shooting the monster's head off and scrambling to get the body off of Kearney. But just when you think things can't get any more chaotic, bullets start pelting the boat, and Amberson looks over and his eyes land on the unconscious Chief Tremaine. However, that's the last thing he sees, because the Viet Cong, from a pontoon boat, fire a rocket launcher at the sailors, launching them all into the air in a fiery explosion. And sadly, Amberson did not survive this, as Kearney found him impaled through the heart. So, with the adrenaline pumping, Kearney threw Chief Tremaine over his shoulder and ran off into the jungle as gunshots rang out behind him. So after hearing this story again, the Navy SEALs finally believe Kearney, acknowledging that they too used to be a larger team of 6, but they were reduced down to just 2. The SEAL in charge then tersely informs Kearney that they'll give the chief just a few more hours to wake up, because they're leaving with or without him in order to search for some way to get the hell out of Vietnam. We return from there to the airport base, where Samson and Major Swan are enjoying a nice scotch together. The two discuss the whole Sergeant Dawes incident, and Samson says some dumbass shit about his supposed tribal shaman grandfather, who I guess had a saying that if you shoot a snake in its tail, it'll come back to bite you. The Major agrees with the sentiment. However, he's down to less than 60 men, and until Washington gives the word to return home, he's obligated to keep the U.S. Army forces in Vietnam together. And so, really, it's just a matter of if they can survive that long. We cut to the very next morning, that being February 18th, 1968, and we see what our good friend, Sergeant Dawes, is actually up to right now. And, well, he appears to be sitting on a pile of dead bodies, pouring a Jack Daniels down a detached zombie's head's throat. Yeah, the guy's completely lost it, and he firmly crunches the head down onto the barrel of his gun, which he then proceeds to fire and spray into the air overhead. One of his men is like, "What the fuck are you doing? That shit's contaminated." But the sergeant mockingly asks, "What, is someone gonna get infected or something?" And he raises his arm, revealing that he's already been bitten. And he's under no illusions. He knows there's no cure. But apparently the infection is slow acting enough that he has time yet to wait out for the inevitable. But that's not all. No. Sergeant Dawes' impending doom has also granted him a new perspective on life. You see, with the limited time he has left, he has started to organize a coup against Major Swan. I suppose he has either gone fully nihilistic and wants to burn everything down before he goes, or he thinks he's genuinely some kind of hero who's saving his men before they get killed. Whatever the case, meanwhile, back at Ton Son Nha Airport, Yam, Watson, and a few other soldiers begin the painstaking process of digging a tunnel through the collapsed part of the terminal with the hopes of finding the still intact hangars that they are unable to get to. Yam is less than happy about becoming a tunnel rat again, but this is monumentally important work, because, as we shall see, Major Swan has just got off the phone with Washington, D.C. Apparently, the president's last official action before his demise was to broker a ceasefire, officially ending the Vietnam War once and for all. And the Major just got word of this, as well as the command to wrap everything up and prepare for the bringing of the American forces back home. But, as he tells Alice, who just walked into the room, it's not going to be an easy task, as there are troops stranded throughout the entire country, and it's rather unlikely that they'll be able to locate and pick up every stranded American in Vietnam. The Major then looks at a framed picture of his family, and he breaks down in tears. He asks Alice how he can ever return home looking like the way he does. He's never told his family about his disfigurement, and that's the reason he keeps re-upping his contract, so he never has to return home. Alice comforts the Major, reminding him that he's a good man who has saved lots of lives, and his family will see that in him, and they will love him just the same. She then says that she understands his pain, his scars, because, as Alice shows him, she has her own running across her wrists. And this is where things start getting heavy, because Alice shares that they were from multiple suicide attempts. Major Swan asks her why she would ever do something like that to herself, and Alice responds that it was because of how she was sexually abused by her own father as a young girl. When Alice had told her mother, their father winded up leaving, and her mom blamed her for it, and she began physically assaulting Alice. Her mom scratched and burned her with cigarettes. But one night, things escalated when her mother boiled a pan of vegetable oil and poured it all over her unsuspecting daughter. Alice then shakily unbuttons her shirt, revealing the full-body scars her family left her. And on that disturbing note, we return to the jungle, where First Class Kearney gets taken by surprise, and he just about perishes before one of the Navy SEALs swoops in and slices off the tip of the aggravating zombie's skull with a machete. The SEAL then berates Kearney for being a useless fuck, and he straight up tells Kearney to go ahead and kill himself and save everyone else the trouble. The other SEAL hears this and sympathetically tries to cheer Kearney back up, but the guy's such a half-wit that he immediately pulls rank. The SEAL puts him down and tells him that his fancy commission doesn't mean anything when you're in the field with no experience. But Kearney just replies that their disregard for military hierarchy protocol is all going in the court-martial he's going to file on them. He's also upset that they abandoned Chief Tremaine in the jungle when he failed to wake up, but that seems to be a second-order offense, and placed well below just the raw disrespect he's been receiving. Anyway, they all get back to what they were doing, which is combing through a seemingly abandoned village for supplies, and Kearney seems to be mentally deteriorating, and he keeps replaying the insults he's received over and over again in his head. It even takes him a minute to realize the startling discovery he's just made in one of the huts. It's a Vietnamese family, tightly clutching each other with worried expressions on their faces, wailing that they're not with the Viet Cong. But Kearney can't really hear them, though. All he can hear is a voice screaming in the back of his head that he's useless and should kill himself. And so Kearney grits his teeth, and he coldly slaughters the entire family without a hint of mercy. The SEALs rush over to him, and they ask what the fuck happened. And Kearney replies that he encountered a zombie that he had to put down. But it's okay, because he also found some food. A psychotic grin then grows over his face, and Kearney mutters to himself that he's, quote, starting to get the hang of this. Whatever, bro. As this is happening, back at the base, progress is being made on the tunnel they're digging. Yam just wants this shit to be over as quickly as possible, because he's got Gilligan Island reruns to watch, but nevertheless, he's interrupted. First, by a soldier that reminds him to slow down, so they can set up the excavation support beams, and second, by the sudden emergence of several pairs of zombie hands crawling out of the earth. Obviously, that kind of triggers Yam, and he slips into a PTSD flashback. Bro, why does this image make him look like a baby in the womb trying to fight off the abortion doctors? Anyway, Yam goes totally feral mode, and he starts savagely beating down his enemies with a shovel. He even forcefully plants it into a zombie's mouth, before he uses his strength and leverage to catapult its head off. The soldier he's with is like, holy shit, dude. And Yam is like, yeah, I'm done. And so he walks away to go take a shower. So Yam shuffles over to the large open shower that I guess this airport has, and he begins undressing. However, he soon realizes that it's already being occupied by the showering nurse Alice. The two's eyes meet, and there is an awkward pause before Alice quickly covers herself and angrily tells Yam to leave before she just completely breaks down, sobbing on the floor and calling herself a freak. Yam stammers out an apology for the staring, but he tells her that she's not a freak, just someone with scars. And at least she's still beautiful and can hide them. Yam points out that he's Asian, and people make damn sure he can't forget it. Alice touches Yam's shoulder, and she points out that that was the second time he's called her beautiful. And so the two have sex in the showers. Also Tambourine's there for some reason. Ugh. Whatever the case, the good times are coming to an end, because on the outside of the base, Sergeant Dawes and his men have just stormed the gate with guns drawn. Major Swan comes outside, and he stares down the intruder and asks why he's deserted his post. The sergeant answers that they're done taking orders, and that they're going to fight their way to the hangars and get out of Vietnam. The major cuts him off and sharply responds that everybody's getting out. The war's over, and evacuation starts once the access tunnel is finished being dug. This leaves Sergeant Dawes completely stunned for a moment, and one of his men excitedly tells him that now they don't have to go through with the revolt anymore. But the sergeant resentfully brushes that suggestion off, and he declares that this changes absolutely nothing. In his eyes, the major's still gotta pay. So he gives a secret signal, and 60 yards away, a sniper team moves into position. The major, for his part, is done playing diplomat at this point, and he tells the sergeant that the only way he's leaving is zipped up in a body bag. But those words barely have left his lips before there is a loud bang, followed by a bullet that rips through the air. And, sadly, it strikes Major Swan's skull, splattering the brains out of the back of his head. Samson immediately slumps over in defeat, and Yam and Alice rush outside to see what all the commotion is about. When Alice sees the Major's bloodied body, she lets out a shrill cry, and she calls the sergeant a heartless murderer. But he tells her there's a new sheriff in town. And then, at gunpoint, the sergeant forces Alice to open up her bathrobe. However, when he sees her scars, his face twists in a look of disgust, and he loudly asks if that shit's contagious. He then tells his men to get that quote-unquote sideshow bitch locked up with all her friends. Sorry for laughing. It's just so mean and over the top. The tonal whiplash is absolutely crazy. In any case, Yam, Alice, Watson, and the Indians, Samson and Hickok, as well as the rest of Swan loyalists, they're all locked away in the mess hall or something. The crew speculates that Sergeant Dawes must have snapped after watching all of the powerful and well-connected suits escape Vietnam while he and his men were gradually whittled down on the front line. But none of that really matters now, and Hickok points out that actually they are probably the ones best suited to actually getting out of Vietnam because, well, he's a pilot, and Yam is the one best able to navigate the tunnel, so all they need is the right moment. Meanwhile, in the jungle, one of the Navy SEALs stands over the ledge of a pit containing a mass of zombies desperately reaching out for him. Kearney, for his part, is triangulating their location, which he determines to be in a village called My Lai. The SEAL tells Kearney to put on his war face and come over here, because these zombies are more fucked up than normal for some reason, and they don't look like they were ever Viet Cong. And this is, of course, an opaque reference to the My Lai massacre, which the creators said took place a month earlier in this universe in order to fit into the 68 timeline. Regardless, something about the term Warface really strikes a chord with Kearney, because he keeps repeating it like a cracked-out parrot in a remedial English class. He even pulls a gun out on the SEAL, and then proceeds to coldly shoot him. The guy nearly falls into the zombie pit, but he manages to pull himself away, with only a tiny little bite taken out of his ankle. But the unfortunate sequence of events doesn't end there. No. Kearney sneaks up on the recovering SEAL, and he forcefully twists his knife through the guy's ear. And some minutes later, we see what became of the other Navy SEAL. It appears that off-screen, he must have got caught in a Viet Cong booby trap, I guess. But regardless, the SEAL hears a rustling sound, and he weakly looks up, and his eyes focus on the silhouette of Kearney, obscured in shadows. When he steps closer into the light, we discover that Kearney has cut off the other SEAL's face and is now wearing it as a mask. His crazed eyes peer through the skin, and it's here where he adopts his new name, Warface. Bro, this guy's corny as hell. In any event, back at the airport base, things are not going great either. The snipers who killed Major Swan wind up getting sniped themselves. It's the Viet Cong who, because no one's guarding the perimeter anymore, have just waltzed into the base. And worse than that, they also have zombies on leashes that they're leading around and then heedlessly releasing into the base. Sergeant Dawes sees everything rapidly falling apart around him, and so he orders his men to open fire. But as soon as he says that, he's randomly struck across the face by Tambourine with his tambourine. The sergeant ain't playing around no more, though, and so he instantly shoots Tambourine and walks away. But Tambourine isn't down for the count yet, as we see him silently crawl toward the base's armory, pushing through the pain and clutching his bleeding wound. As that is occurring, one of the sergeant's men rushes to unlock the containment room, shouting that they need all hands on deck to finish digging out the tunnel. But as soon as the soldier opens the door, he's violently smacked by Watson with his crutches. And with that, the team of 5 make their escape, hurrying toward the yet incomplete tunnel to the functioning runway. Unfortunately, they have no weapons on them, but luckily, they at least find a couple of shovels there. So, yeah, they all, quite literally, began digging for their lives. And on the surface, the situation is rapidly deteriorating. The Americans are dropping like flies, and it's pretty much just down to the sergeant and a few of his men. The guy's not afraid, though. Maybe because he's unhinged or going to die anyway. I don't know. Regardless, as Sergeant Dawes reloads his gun, he hears this obnoxious rattling sound. And when he turns around, he sees Tambourine mockingly shaking his instrument in his face. The sergeant narrows his eyes, and he's about to shoot him again. But then, Tambourine rips open his jacket to reveal 6 live grenades taped to the interior. He then speaks for the first time, stuttering out simply that he followed the sergeant. And before anyone can stop him, Tambourine swiftly pulls out the pins, triggering a deafening explosion that rattles the entire base and sends body parts fleeing through the air. Obviously, underground, the crew feels the consequences of this final sacrifice as the tunnel shakes around them. Thankfully, it steadies down though, and Yam and Alice pray that whatever that was, hopefully it took Sergeant Dawes out with it. It seems that their luck is finally turning around because pretty soon Samson finally manages a breakthrough and light floods the tunnel. They carefully peek their heads outward, and they see that getting to a plane won't be easy, as they still have yet to navigate piles of rubble, and the relentless undead still walk about. But they are determined to get home, and if they have each other, they may just well have a fighting chance. But I suppose that's a tale for another day, because the miniseries ends with us seeing what's exactly going on back home. And we see that a tank is right now rolling across the Verrazano Bridge, engaged in an epic battle against endless hordes of the soulless monsters. And with that, we conclude the story of 68 Scars, with a cliffhanger ending promising a dramatic continuation in another arc coming down the line.
Kowalski, analysis.
So that was another 68 arc under our belt. But what did you guys think of today's tale? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section down below. As for the future of the series on this channel, well, the next miniseries seems to be the most popular one. It doesn't really continue the Yam storyline in any way, but it does set up events and characters which will tie back in later on. So that's exciting. But yeah, looking forward to it. In terms of analysis stuff, I'll keep it relatively brief and straightforward today. I'll begin with more technical stuff first. In short, I liked it for the most part. My biggest issue with 68 Scars is that I feel like it's so focused on setup, it feels a little incoherent in isolation. And what do I mean by this? Well, for example, the subplots around Yam's parents, or the Kearney/Warface stuff, well, they seem kind of random and lacking in payoff. Like, I'm not even sure why 68 Scars is its own separate miniseries, if its identity and meaning is so contingent on future arcs retroactively granting certain aspects their significance. But don't get me wrong, though, it was definitely entertaining. And I'm just trying to call them like I see them, okay? To that end, I think the 4-issue constraint really hurt here. There was a new cast, multiple settings, and targeted character moments, but because there was so much in so little space, it felt like we were going at breakneck pace. I think allowing for more time for build-up and for letting the emotionally charged moments sit a bit longer, I think it would have done wonders. Because right now, it can feel a little jarring, rapidly cutting through scenes like a stereoscope. Once again, not hating, I swear, I'm just chilling, okay? Just chilling. But in terms of deeper themes and stuff, today I am more interested in surveying your all thoughts on the political character of the 68 series. There were very interesting readings last video from you guys in that regard. Perhaps, sadly, it was out of some sort of cowardice on my part that ultimately dissuaded me from addressing certain things more directly and head-on last time. I hope it's not the case, but it's difficult to say. Right, so the original story had members of the anti-war side depicted as, performative, self-interested, shallow, and spiritually barren. And some of you took that as the creators making a targeted statement, and it recast the work in readings under a more apologetic lens. But now with the series continuation openly referencing things like My Lai, does that change how you appraise this work, or at least complicate it? Because, I mean, of course, the incident was certainly not a positive reflection of the U.S. military or of the war. And like I said, this is not a rhetorical question or gotcha. I am truly just canvassing opinions from you today. My mind is not at all made up, especially as I know that the series gets less and less grounded and more silly from here. But I am nothing if not an open mind, and I'll try to give everyone a fair shake before making up my mind. Another completely unrelated thing, but I'm also kind of ambivalent about the whole scars thing, I guess, psychologically speaking. Like, on the one hand, scars are permanent damage. They're not something you can ever run away from. They follow you everywhere you go, and well, I understand that, okay? I can conceptualize that. But on the other hand, everyone already kind of carries these invisible scars with them that life and circumstances all too frequently saddle us with. So, for instance, in the story, even if Alice's parents never resorted to, permanent physical harm, she would still always carry with her the experiences she had, and her personality would have always been forever changed by the incidents. So, what I don't understand is why there is such a seemingly large difference in weight afforded to the scars you see versus the scars you don't. It could be shame, perhaps, as others can see one and not the other. But I guess in the one sense, the changing behaviors and dispositions is the scarring. And in the other, physical sense, one often changes how they present themselves in order to stymie external reactions to said damage. But who am I to say, really? But that about does it for today's video. If you enjoyed, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button on the way out, alright? But until next time, I will thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good one.